everyone. I am Jade Floyd, Vice President of Communications at the Case and Pet Network and Revolution. It's my delight today to welcome these three dynamic founders to the Tech Inclusion stage. As you all know, entrepreneurship and the American dream, they go hand in hand. And each of the founders on the screen today remind us that with grit and tenacity and fearlessness, that startups can really accomplish big, bold breakthroughs and change how millions of consumers interact and experience the world. So much of my time spent working for digital pioneers and investors, Gene and Steve Case, is to ensure that founders from all walks of life can really participate and have equal access into the networks and the capital that can enable their businesses to scale and grow. So that's why I'm so thrilled to have these founders joining us, sharing more on their journeys today. So today we're joined by Rathna Sharad. She's founder and CEO of Flavor Cloud. It is an e-commerce platform using deep learning to evaluate carriers' historical performance and automatically suggesting the best international shipping rates at checkout. Rathna is also the founder of Runway to Street. It's a curated direct-to-consumer Flavor Cloud SaaS-enabled marketplace, and that allows brands to sell to a global audience. Jennifer Fitzgerald is co-founder and CEO of Policy Genius. It's a company that has helped more than 30 million people across the globe shop for all types of insurance online and via app, and they've placed more than $60 billion in coverage. And Melissa Hanna, she's co-founder and CEO of Mommy. It's a platform that focuses on maternity and infant care management, partnering with payers and providers. And they make it easier for all families to really receive comprehensive prenatal and postpartum care. So each of these founders, all stars, #girlboss, they've all raised considerable capital from many of the most formidable investors and venture capitalists from across the globe, including our firm Revolution. So I really look forward to jumping into this discussion. I want to talk a little bit with them how they're pivoting in this new environment, the many lessons that they've learned in building really dynamic, great companies. So let's get started. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. Policy Genius, you've seen such tremendous growth over this past year. You've opened a new HQ, a second HQ. You've hired over 250 people, many of which you've done via Zoom. So in this new environment where employees and new hires are hiring remotely, how are you operationalizing your management structures to ensure that they really support diversity and equity and inclusion as you're going through this hiring process from afar?
It's a great question and something that we've been working a lot on this year, because I think focusing on the employee experience as well as DEI outcomes is just tougher when everybody's remote and you don't have the ability to do a lot of things in person, which is how we have typically operated. So we've done several things. One is we have implemented objectives to increase top of funnel diversity for all of our roles. We're hiring across the board in both markets. We've struck up partnerships with HBCUs. We've thought about increasing talent pools that are diverse to increase top of funnel diversity. Second, for leadership roles, and we define those as director and above at the companies, we are looking to make sure that we've got, again, top of funnel diversity in there. When we work with executive search firms, which we do a lot for executive like VP and above roles, we talk to them about, what can we expect to see in terms of diversity of candidates? So that's been a big focus for us. Two is, managing and being a good manager when you are fully remote and people are distributed and there's a lot of, anxiety and concern about what's going on in the broader world is tough. And being a manager is tough in normal circumstances. This is making it very tough to be a manager. So we've leaned into providing additional training. Life Labs, for example, has spun out a new course on how to be a good remote manager. So we've invested more in training just so that people feel like they have resources and new tools in their toolbox, because we're asking a lot of our managers and a lot of challenges that quite frankly few of us have faced as managers in a company.
I love those suggestions. So Rathna, you started Flavor Cloud with the idea that you could really leverage your experience in customs and supply chain technology to fill some of these gaps that you were seeing with small to mid-sized international sellers. So we're seeing, obviously, with everyone at home buying online, getting things shipped to their door, there's a massive surge in e-commerce amid COVID-19. So talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you're seeing and how Flavor Cloud is meeting those.
Yeah. So we're seeing three, I think, really big themes and shifts that are pretty much here to stay. So the longevity of that is certain. So the first one is very obvious. It's the growth in e-commerce. Everybody, you can see consumer behavior, our behavior each day. It has dramatically shifted. So essentially what we're seeing right now is volumes that are very much like holiday volumes. So there's a huge surge in e-commerce. It's around 40% that we're seeing across verticals, really. And then the flip side of that is obviously a lot of brick and mortar is really moving online. So that is part of that growth that we're seeing. So a lot of it is about, for us, we think about Flavor Cloud as the largest cross-border network of carriers and providers and partners. And so really dealing with that surge in terms of capacity and planning for network resilience is part of it. The second shift that we're seeing is that there is a D2C, which is direct-to-consumer surge. So one of the things that happened is FBA, which is fulfillment by Amazon, for example, left merchants on their own. So basically, they started looking at their own volumes and their own capacity issues and essentially said, you're on your own. So direct-to-consumer has seen a surge where they have to figure out their own destiny and are moving online, figuring out how to grow in this environment and have their own e-commerce presence. And that's where the shift to international and leveraging Flavor Cloud to really have international is their number one growth outside of being online. The second thing you do is expand. And so that's where we come in. And specifically around that, we've started seeing shifts in terms of trade wars and Brexit and all of these other concerns really impact how you think about global expansion. And that's where a specialty solution like us, which really takes away all of the complexity of trade, whether it's with China or China inbound because of the surge in e-commerce purchases, or dealing with trade and tariff regulatory issues that we're seeing in the space. Then the third change that we're seeing, and that's again fundamental to how we think about how brands think about supply chain resilience, is important. Because the next COVID could be regional, it could be global. We've seen different countries come back online at different times, and so it's really about ensuring that as a brand, whether you have multiple warehouses or building some sort of resilience in your supply chain, is part of the action.
So let's pivot to Melissa. I was especially drawn to your product. I'm a new mom, 6-month-old here at home, probably screaming in the background if you can hear her. Your company, Mommy, it utilizes a business model that's really rooted in supporting better outcomes for mothers. And we've all witnessed how COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on our healthcare system. It's really impacted the family structure. So what long-term impacts are you seeing the pandemic having on maternal health services, and how is Mommy adapting to meet the needs and the demands in this new environment?
Hi, thank you so much for that question and for having me here in this conversation. There are a lot of things that we are watching closely as far as the trends that are happening at the micro level and macro level due to the impact of COVID-19, specifically in the new and expecting parent population. And a few things that we are especially concerned about are the long-term effects that the pandemic will have on mental health and wellness for new mothers and for families generally, because we know that the isolation and the stress that the pandemic is bringing into all of our lives is especially worrisome when your body is going through recovery from pregnancy or is experiencing a pregnancy where stress can be potentially a trigger for preterm delivery, for example. We're also concerned about the disparities in care that existed way before the pandemic hit the United States, and will likely persist. And we're concerned about sliding back into metrics that have been not great for the United States for quite a while. The United States spends more than any other developed nation to take care of moms and babies every year. Between public and private insurance plans, we see over $160 billion.
Excuse me. Sorry, Melissa. Sorry, super apologize, but your audio is really garbled, and we can't hear you. So
okay,
it's really hard. So if you can refresh or either try just not using AirPods. So super sorry.
So Melissa, while you're working on that, let me actually pivot to a question that is for all of you. And Melissa, we're going to come back to you because I want to get back into that conversation. So, all of us here are really aware of the impact that COVID is having on each of our everyday experiences, whether it be, in the workplace, whether it's at home. And this global pandemic has really shaken up the world in ways that no one really could have imagined. And the business community has really been no exception. So can you talk about how you as CEOs, as managers, as business leaders are really navigating through this crisis from that perspective? What's the advice that you'd give to other founders and CEOs that are building these brands, that are trying to support not only their home lives, but also, hundreds and oftentimes thousands of employees that rely on them? Talk to us a little bit about some of the advice that you'd give to some of those founders. And let's start with you, Rathna, on that question.
Yeah, the first thing here for us is that we're a distributed team. So we were, in a way, prepared for this, and it wasn't that hard of a transition to really, take the team completely virtual. But having said that, the primary thing that we had to change in terms of processes was around, we're no longer going to be visiting customers, and how we do sales calls and how we do onboarding has become completely virtual. In a way, I feel like this has leveled the playing field so that you're not competing for, conference floor space. It really is about a virtual call and then, onboarding and sales processes, and really refining that so that it makes it really easy for the team. So I'd say that is one of the fundamental changes that we had to make, and it's important for the new reality that we're all in. The second one I'd say is about, for us, given that we're in this stage where it's about scaling and growing, and we are a small team, and there is so much happening with COVID that it is an accelerant. There's lots of different opportunities and channels. So as a CEO, my primary focus has been relentless prioritization. So really bringing it down to focus on channels and things that my team can really focus on. So I think about ROI on time spent, because that's the most critical thing for us right now. We could be doing so many different things, and it's really bringing that focus into the types of areas and channels that we want to grow in, so that the team is better prepared in the current environment.
Great. Jennifer, what about you? And then Melissa, we're going to jump to you on that question too. Talk to us a little bit about, the advice that you have for founders, and you've been navigating this situation as a CEO.
Sure. Plus one to the previous comments, right, about having to be far more focused and really tracking the return on your time invested, because there's so many things that you can do. Coordination asynchronously when you're not together, and when employees are having different challenges that they're having to deal with, right? So there are some companies that were always distributed, but this is now distribution with the addition of a pandemic, right? And the loss of like childcare or normal schooling options. So what we have found, and we are also in growth and scaling mode, is that employees have different sentiments about working from home, going back to the office. We do surveys of our employees every 2 weeks just to gauge sentiment, right? How are you dealing with this? How connected do you feel with the company? Is your manager checking in on you? if we were to reopen one of our offices, how would you feel about returning to office, assuming we can do so safely? And what we've found is that there's different sentiments, right? So our employees in New York City feel differently than our employees in Durham, North Carolina. Our parents feel differently than people who aren't parents, or younger single people who are, in the case of one employee I know of, taking calls from the attic of his parents' home in Long Island, right? So, which is a different situation than if you have a home in the suburbs. So I think as a founder and CEO, you have to be aware that this particular situation and this moment in time is just creating a bunch of different impacts for your employees, and to make sure that you're being pretty granular about how you're thinking about those impacts for those specific employees, because everybody's dealing with it differently and dealing with a whole different set of issues.
Mm-hmm. Melissa, what about you? All right, don't stress. We will come back. So, my next question, in this startup world, it's so hard, I think, especially as female founders, to talk about failure. But oftentimes failures can really lead to some of the greatest lessons learned for a company, and they can really bring forth new ideas and ways to pivot. And I want to talk to you a little bit about a moment of failure in your company, and how did that really set you up later for success? And what are some of the lessons that you learned along the way? Let's start with you, Jennifer.
Sure. I think as a founder, everything is, you face failures all the time, mistakes that you make all the time. And I think the thing is around being self-aware when you do it. And this has been a learning for me. I think early on, I felt like I had to be perfect and invulnerable and, not admit to failures and mistakes and just keep pushing on being strong. And I thought that I would lose trust of, investors or the board of employees if I admitted to mistakes. And I realized that wasn't the case, that admitting them is a key part of building trust, and showing that you're aware and how you're changing behaviors or how you're going to change your decisions next time has been key for me, and has been probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned. I think as the CEO, ultimately your main job at the end of the day is making sure that you're bringing the right talent and leadership to the company. And anybody who's hired, at any level knows that that's hard to get right, is hiring the right person at the right time and making sure that they're set up for success. And I've made mistakes along the way, as every hiring manager has. And I think for me, the thing is to be reflective about what I could have done better, right? Did I not set this person up for success? Did I not give them the right context to be able to succeed in their role? What were the things that I could have done better to make this not a mistake? And that's probably the toughest thing to get right as you scale a company, and especially as you try to scale yourself as a leader.
Thank you so much for that. So Melissa, what we were talking about, as you pipe back in, is that some of the greatest lessons learned from failures and how they can bring forth new ideas and how we conduct business. So I'd love to hear from you any lessons that you've learned in moments of failure within your company that you'd like to share.
Sure. First, does my sound
You sound great.
Okay. I would say that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as a CEO and during the pandemic is that it's very important to communicate with the entire organization to continue, especially still being an early stage but growing company that's actually going through sort of a growth spurt now, and we're going to be hiring and increasing our staff by 50 to 60% just in the next few months. So we're hiring as a company. But keeping those direct lines of communication open with the entire organization. And I've never had a problem displaying vulnerability with my team. And I felt the power of that the day before the mayor of Los Angeles, where our company is based, called for the shelter in place in the city. I had been following the news before then and seeing the numbers rising in Los Angeles, and called a team meeting earlier that week and proposed working remote. Our team provides a combination of virtual and in-home healthcare across Southern California and other parts of the country, but our main organization works in Southern California. So to tell people to work from home when they normally visit mothers and babies in their own homes multiple times a day, we see sometimes 5 to 10 new patients a day with just one staff member visiting, doing a home visitation model. That was going to be difficult for our team. I knew that, and initially people would say, well, how are we supposed to do our jobs? And so to be very strong about saying that this is a measure that we need to take really from a public health standpoint until we have determined what we need as a company to be able to re-enter the market. Even though we're essential workers, we needed to take that minute to breathe and understand that this was a scary moment and we were going to have to reorganize our entire business operation. Calling that meeting in a moment in time where I didn't realize just how stressed our own company was with this, not seeing leadership at a local or national level yet, the feedback that I got from that was incredible. And it set the tone for how to engage with the company going forward. And we're not as large as Policy Genius. And so we don't have like a rapid surveying tool or process like Jennifer's described, although I think that's a brilliant practice to put in place. But I'm basically modeling that in person with the team as we go. And it's been powerful to be able to get that direct feedback from our organization. And we are essential workers, so we have been able to return to some of our in-person work with full PPE.
Great. Rathna, can you answer that question also?
Yeah, so my fundamental belief here is that, if we're not failing, then we're not pushing hard on innovation. Mm-hmm. And so it's really about being fearless and pushing the boundaries, because a lot of what we do has never been done before. So it's greenfield, and so there is going to be a ton of learning as we, navigate trade and compliance and building the world's premier carrier network that does cross-border anywhere to anywhere. So, we're fundamentally changing the industry and how it works. And so I expect there to be failures, but at the same time, it's about learning from them and not repeating the same thing.
Great. So we have about 3 minutes left. I have some lessons that I learned from each of you that I've jotted down. But before we conclude, talk to us really quick. Share one piece of advice you'd have for founders and or aspiring founders who might be tuning into this live stream today as they are starting their company or as they're putting down on paper that bold vision. What's your one word of advice to them? Not one word, but one sentence or so word of advice. Jennifer, let's start with you.
Yeah, happy to jump in. My one piece of advice is find good help and advice. Find people who have done what you're trying to do, not necessarily the same thing, but started a company, launched a small business, who are, 12 months ahead of you. So they have the benefit of hindsight and can tell you what to look out for. That's been hugely helpful for me.
Melissa, what about you?
I would second that, and I'd add to it that it is really important to heed all of the advice that Jennifer just shared. The 12 to 18 months ahead of you is actually a critical part of that. Early on in building Mommy, I had founder friends who were their companies were much more advanced and had gone through multiple rounds of funding and were telling me sort of the war stories from those stages of company development. And it created a lot more anxiety and pressure than it needed to, because I didn't understand that the advice that they were giving and the things that they were sharing were things that were so far down the path that they weren't necessarily applicable or even relevant to the stage that I was in as a founder, as a CEO, and in building a team. Finding people who are just a little bit farther ahead on the road is critical to being able to then digest that advice and then really be able to immediately start applying it into your business. And if you feel like someone's saying something to you and you're having that sensation of like, well, how could I possibly do this right now? Or how could I put that into practice? There might be some insight in that to just really gut check what stage you're at in building your company. Mm. I think that the space is wide open for so many new ideas that really focus on inclusivity and on different worldviews and experiences of the world, that we all feel like we've got to get out there. We've got to get our companies out there. We all have something to offer to the world. And it's a really exciting time in that way to be able to provide value to people that have been historically underserved in all of our different spaces. But too much pressure will be a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a pace and there's a path to go on. And you need to also take care of yourself and have grace for yourself as well in this process.
Yes, absolutely. Rathna.
I would agree with both of them, great advice, but I want to add that, we need more women starting companies. We need more women scaling companies all the way through to IPO. So my advice is be fearless. Just go do it. Because I think the best thing that you're going to get out of this is the growth. And the pace is extremely exciting. And you will figure it out. That's one thing that, you rely on your network and do all of the things that they mentioned here. But it's really about being fearless and going out and doing it.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to recap a couple of key things that I heard for everyone who's tuning in. These, for me, really resonate. One, use your power, use your privilege to create change. Jennifer, you shared that you really need to increase that funnel of diversity, that you need to use HBCUs as talent pools, and that you really have to provide additional training for your staff, especially your managers, and plan for network resiliencies. I also learned, Rathna, for you, this concept of relentless prioritization, and that you really need to take a look deeply at the ROI and track the ROI at any given moment. I love that you're surveying your employees to learn from them exactly, how you should move forward and listening to them. And that, really that your job is to make sure that you're bringing the right talent and the right leadership to the table. And Melissa, I learned so much from you too at this point. You said that it's so important to communicate with the entire company and have that open line of communication at a given time, especially in, this place that we are in the world, and that you really have to display your vulnerability within your company, and let your employees know that, sometimes we aren't always superheroes that they may think that we are. So I really appreciate all the time that each of you founders took to share with us and to enlighten this audience. I hope that each of you will follow their journeys, as well as check out the companies Flavor Cloud, Policy Genius, and Mommy. And thank you so much. And I hope each of you continue on and are building the next billion-dollar brand. And I'm just honored to have spent this time with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.